Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Zevachim Daf Samchet. We're gonna get organize the sukkah from yesterday. Go a little farther. If you were watching the YouTube yesterday, so I fixed up the presentation after class, as I kind of finished preparing it just before class. I made some more. Nothing was particularly wrong, but I made it kind of more exacting and added some more details to make it a little more clear if you're reading it kind of on your own. So re if you want to go over that presentation, you can look on the website. It's there in a Canva form, so you can kind of watch it as a presentation. It's also there as a PDF. Okay, we're going to get started with a quick review of what we did yesterday. So we started with this machloket Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Eliezer, which we actually started already on Daf Samchvav. There we had this big debate. If you took an ola and you did it at the bottom, the Kohen does the malika and everything at the bottom of the altar, which is not where you're supposed to do it. And it's where you're supposed to do a sin offering, like a sin offering, for the sake of a sin offering. According to Rabbi Yeshua, it already removes me'ila as if it was a sin offering. Rabbi Eliezer says, no way, no how. Right? Ola, it was an ola to begin with. We're certainly not going to remove me'ila from it. Olas are always more severe, and you can't just do that. And Rabbi Ada bar Ahava came in yesterday's daf and caused a lot of ruckus because he said that Rabbi Yeshua basically said that it's like you took this ola and you basically pulled it to be a chatat. Okay, uses the word literally pulled. Okay, nimshechet v'naset chatata of. Right, as soon as you do malika of one siman, which is all you need to do in a chatat, it basically becomes a chatat. To which the Gemara starts asking him all sorts of questions. And starting on Amud Bet, we started asking questions from Mishnayot in Kinim. And there we have one case with two women, and each was missing one kind of korban. And then we said, well, who cares, right? We'll just say whichever one he brought below, right? Though if he brought them both below, so we'll say the two he brought below, we'll just say one of them is the chatat for the one, right? The one who has the chatat can be yotze because we can either say either was a chatat because it was a chatat or it was a chatat, right? This is actually the one when it was chalamala chalamata. We could say the chatat was at least right. Either it was a chatat or it was done as an ola, and she could be yotze or chiyuv. And then we said, then right. In other words, right, that was one and one. It should at least be able to be done for that. And they say no, that he definitely doesn't say what he said when it comes to two people. Okay, that can't possibly be because when it comes to two people, you can say, okay, if I was bringing an ola and a chata, we could take my ola and move it into a chata, but we can't move it into someone else's korban. That makes a lot of sense. Now we go to the second one, which was the chatat and the ola of two people, but they did it this time b'shutfut. They were kind of partners in bringing all these birds. There was a stuma and there was a mefureshet, right? There was one that wasn't specified at all. That is very easy. We can just say, okay, the one that was unspecified, the Kohen can actually decide which one's going to be what. But there was this mefureshet one, which didn't work. And then we said, again, why, when it was mefureshet, when they specifically, we knew one was an ola, one was a chatat, why should that bother us? Because the ola can always turn into a chatat. And then we said, maybe, that Mishnah just doesn't follow Rabbi Yeshua. To which the Gemara jumped and said, no way, no how can you say that Mishnah doesn't follow Rabbi Yeshua? Because, now here's a big because, it's going to take us a really long time and a lot of confusing cases to get there. But because we're going to have all these cases, okay, and basically the way it's going to work is we start off with a case where a woman brings two sets of birds and there's mess ups, and she's going to start from bringing either, we start with, right? We start with she has to bring another two to replace it. We're going to get to 3, then 4, then 5, then 6, then 7, then 8. Okay? So we're in the middle of those cases, and I'm going to just go back and start with the last case that we had. Okay? So I'm going to go through the last case just one more time. So we have a woman. Let's just go through the basics. She says, if I give birth to a male child, I will bring 2 sets of birds. And as she promises, so I'm going to bring 2 birds as a vow. Okay? Now, when you bring a vow, you bring korbanot olah. Okay? There's no korban chatat. So she says, I'm going to bring 2 korbanot olah if I have a boy. Now, if she has a boy, she has to bring the 2 korbanot olah, and she also needs to bring her regular birth ones, which is a chatat and an olah. So she brings that. But what's the problem? Okay, so she gives it to the Kohen, and he's supposed to do 3 above and 3 below. Okay, what's the problem? The Kohen didn't, I'm sorry, right, three above and one below. Because the three above, there's three olot here, and there's one sin offering. So that's what he's supposed to do. But instead, the Kohen brought two above and two below. Okay? Thinking, what was his mistake? Okay, we're going to see different mistakes here. In this point, okay, and every single case is going to build on the previous. So in this case, the Kohen didn't, number one, okay, did two things in this case. Number one, he didn't know, he didn't he did it wrong. He did two above and two below, thinking they were both chatats and olas, and not three above and one below. The second thing is, and this is only relevant mishnei minim, okay? We already did mimin echad, right? She just has to add one more, because if it was all one type, so again, the other thing you have to remember is, okay, we'll go through different points you have to remember in all these cases, but the pairs of birds have to be the same. So if you bring your for birth, one for an ola, you have to bring the chatat of the same type. And if you bring your vow as two, a neder of two, you have to bring two of the same bird. So if what she brought to the temple was all the same, then it's very easy. Okay, then basically there was an ola. Okay, this isn't the case. I don't have the picture here, but it's from yesterday. There was one ola down at the top. Two olot down at the top because he put two at the top. One chatat down at the bottom. So you're just missing one ola. But in this case, she brought, okay, let's just go back for a second. She brought two different sets of birds to the temple. Okay, two pigeons and two doves. Okay, so now we have a problem. Why? Because we're not sure which one the Kohen brought. Okay, this is the case we did yesterday, but I'm going to just go through it again to be clear. Like I made the chart a little better and I just wanted to do it like this. So whatever the Kohen brings first, since he brought ola chatat, so obviously the first one's going to count for what it counts for, and only the second one will be disqualified. So the first one's going to be for birth. So if she brought two different types to the temple, so your olan the first one counts as an olan chatat, okay? Those are your doves. Now we have pigeons. The second group was pigeons. So if the second group was pigeons, but we don't know, imagine that. This is what happened. So if the second group is pigeons, she has one pigeon that she brought. There was an ola that counted. And now she just has to add one more pigeon. But if it's the reverse, and first he brought the pigeons, and then he brought the doves, then we're going to have a problem. Because then she's going to have to bring another one. Why another one? Because then the ola, her voluntary, her neder, her vow, was now from an ola, from a pigeon. From a dove. So now she has to bring another dove. Okay? So that's how we get to that she has to bring two. She has to bring both a pigeon and a dove. Okay? That's the case that we finished with. Now we're going to add something else. In the next case, Pirshat Nidra. Okay, we're still at the very bottom of Samach Zayin Amud Bet. What if, now in that case, it didn't matter which ones, as long as there's a pair of the same type, right? We didn't care whether it was pigeons, whether it was doves. It was just a matter of, well, we don't know which one the Kohen did and which one she's missing, so we have to fill in with an extra of each one. In this case, here's why I put a bubble here of what she said. She said, I'm going to bring either two pigeons or two doves. But she didn't remember now. Now here we get not only the Kohen doesn't remember, she doesn't remember either. She doesn't remember which one she promised. And now, in this case, she's going to have to bring three if she brings mimin echad to the temple, right? We keep changing different parameters, okay? Back to that set analogy. So now it's still the same that she brought four birds, okay? She brought two pairs. In this case, it's all of the same type. So let's go through all of the same type, and then we'll get to the same thing. What if it's different types that she brought? She brought two different pairs of two different birds. So now, what happens? So if, again, what did the Kohen do? He brought two above and two below. So the first pair counts for the birth. We don't care what type the birth was, right? It doesn't matter because she never specified anything. So the first two count for the birth, okay? So we're good. Now she has the same two types, right? The same type. So we're all in doves. Now she has one ola there. So what does she get? So now in this case, what she basically has to bring is she has to bring two for birth and she has to bring four for her vow because we don't know if it's pigeons or doves. So she has to bring two doves and two pigeons. Well, in this case, what did she bring in the end? She brought basically her birth pair, and she brought one for the voluntary Ola offering. So she's missing three. Okay, and that's what we get here. So she has to bring one more of the type she brought to the temple to fill in case that was the type she had promised. And she has to bring two more of the other type in case she had promised the other type. That gets us up to three. But now, what if, okay, and that's why she has to bring one of the doves, because that's what she already brought to the temple, and fill in with two pigeons in case it was pigeons that she had promised. Now we get to that case, mishnei minim, with two different types. What if she brought to the temple two doves and two pigeons? Okay, now what do we do? So now we have it a little more complicated because again, we get back to, and this is why I started with that case, option one and option two. Which one did the Kohen bring first? Again, we're missing number one, she doesn't remember what she promised. Number two, the Kohen messed up and didn't do three above and one below, but two above and two below. So that messes up, right? One of them is totally irrelevant. It's a sin offering, it's canceled, and we're missing an Ola at the top. The problem is we don't know which Ola we're missing. We don't know whether she promised Ola to pigeons or Ola to doves. And we also don't know now which of the two pairs that he brought, which were two different types, was the one that was offered first that fulfills the obligation for the birth. Which means if he brought the doves first and then the pigeon is the one that's left as the Ola, so she needs now to bring one pigeon and two doves. Okay, that's this option. Okay, there you have. She has to bring one pigeon and two doves because if the first ones brought were the doves, then the second one brought, which is the only one that still counts as anything, was an Ola of a pigeon, and she just has to fill in one more pigeon. But if it was the reverse and the pigeons were brought first and the doves came second, then the dove is the one that she has already, and she has to fill in one dove and two pigeons. Okay, so now if she has to do for this case two pigeons and a dove, but in the previous option she had to bring two doves. So either which way, she has to bring two doves and two pigeons because we don't know which was the option that happened. Okay, so she's basically, because we don't know, was it option one and option two, which one counted for which obligation, and which is the one that we have one already of, and we just have to fill into two. But since we don't know which one, she ends up having to bring four birds. Okay, next case. Now it's going to get more complicated because we're going to add, like every time, another parameter. In this case, kav'a nadra. So now every option is based on the previous. So we already have the scenario where Cohen did everything above and right, did three above and one below instead of two and two. We have that she promised, right? We don't know which one the Cohen did first or second. And she promised either two doves or two pigeons, and we don't know, she doesn't remember which one. In addition to doing that, she also said, what is kav'a nidra? She said, I'm going, this is why I put a dotted line here, I'm going to bring my obligatory olot, which again, I put the line to this one, but it could be theoretically to the pigeon and not the dove, but I'm going to bring, and it's really to both of them, I'm going to bring my two obligatory korbanot olah, voluntary korbanot olah. I'm going to bring them together with my obligation of the birth ones, which means that the three birds have to be brought at the same time. Now you could see why this is going to complicate things, because in our case, we had the Kohen brought two above and two below, and one counted, if you remember, right? That one Ola counted, okay? And we're just going to add another one, okay? And also the Leda one counted, but now the problem is that just to be clear, she wants to bring the Ola offerings with the Ola of her birth, not with the sin offering of the birth. The sin offering of the birth can be done separately, but all the Olot she wants to be brought at the same time. So the problem here is going to be that if we brought some and not all, then it didn't work, and now you're going to have to bring all together at the same time. Okay, so this is going to add an additional issue. So now the Kohen brought two above and two below, like in all the other cases. But what's the issue here? Well, the two olot at the top don't work because she promised to bring three olot at the same time, and you don't have three olot at the same time, right? If the Kohen had done it perfectly the way he was supposed to, we would have had three olot and all would have been good. So option number one, again, is always going to be mimin echad, where everything was the same type. So if everything is the same type, and she brought all doves, for example, So the only one that worked here to do anything is the sin offering at the bottom, the one sin offering. So she takes care, check on the sin offering for birth. That works. But what's she missing now? So she's missing the Ola from the birth. And that's supposed to go with 2 olot of another bird. Now, the problem is we don't know which bird she promised. So she's basically going to have to bring, right, 5. You can see why 5. She needs 1 ola for birth, and that is whatever type she already brought to the temple, because it always just, right, it doesn't matter which type you bring, it just has to match the type that was already brought. So if it was all doves, so she brings 1 dove for basically to fill in the Leidah, the birth obligation. And then she has to bring 2 olot that are doves and 2 olot that are pigeons, because we don't know which one she promised for her vow. So that's why I have here for birth she brings that 1 olah of a dove. For the vow she has to bring 2 doves and 2 pigeons. Okay. Now obviously we're going to get to what if she didn't bring to the temple all the same types, she brought 2 different types. Now this means she's going to now have to bring 6. Okay, why 6? So again, this is going to be, number one, the issue is only the sin offering is good, like in the previous. And like in the previous example, when we had 2 types, we don't know which one was brought first. So now, right, if the doves were brought first and the pigeons were brought second, then basically what does she have to bring for her birth? She has to bring another dove to fill in, right, that obligation. And she has to bring then the Ola, right, the doves for the vow and the pigeons for the vow. So that's 5. But, okay, so that's the same as we just had. But if it was the reverse order and she brought the pigeons first, then the pigeon sin offering is the one that counted. And now she needs to bring a pigeon Ola offering. So she needs to bring 3 pigeons, because 1 for her birth, 2 for her vow, and 2 doves for the vow. But we still have in the previous option, in option 1, we actually had that for the birth, she actually had to bring the dove and not the pigeon. So because maybe it's option 1, maybe it's option 2, she has to bring 3 of each. Okay, good. Now we get to the next case. Nitanatan lekohen ve'eni yodat manatna. Now we get to the case on steroids, complete steroids here. Okay, we now have she gave it to the Kohen, but she has no idea what she gave to the Kohen. Okay, so either she brought 2 pigeons, 2 doves, or she brought 4 pigeons, or she brought 4 doves. That's number 1 that we don't know. Okay, now, what does she need to do? Okay, this up to 2 is just a mistake. You can ignore that title there. But we're now going to have option 1A, B, and C, option 2, B, and C, and option 3, B, and C, because what's going to happen? Well, the Kohen went. Now, all our cases were built on, just to remember, the Kohen was supposed to do 2 above and 2 below. Sorry, I went ahead by accident. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. Okay, let's go back. No, why is it going like this? Sorry. Trying to go back. Okay. Our previous cases were all that instead of doing 2 above, 2 below, the Kohen brought 2, instead of bringing, 3 above, 1 below, the Kohen brought 2 above and 2 below. In this case, the Kohen doesn't even remember what he did, meaning he could have brought, and here we go, okay, all 4 above, and then which is all 4? It could be 2 pigeons, 2 doves. It could be 4 pigeons. It could be 4 doves. So here we go. Here's 4 pigeons, and here's 4 doves, all above. Now, if he does this, what's the problem? There's no sin offering, right? There's no sin offering because nothing was brought below. Okay, that's different from all the cases we saw before. Because why? Because all those other cases, there were 2 above, 2 below, and at least we have 1 sin offering. In this case, there's no sin offering. Now you can see, okay, I'm just going to read it for a second, and you'll see why in a second you can already figure out what's going on here, because every case built on the previous. So in this case, there's 2 different types, possibly, right? We don't know, but there's at least possibly 2 different types, so we have to be concerned for that scenario. So before we have 4 predim linidra, right? She had to bring either 2 doves or 2 pigeons because we don't know which one she promised. She had to bring 2 for birth for her Ola because she promised she was going to bring all 3 at the same time. So she's now going to have to bring either, right, of either type. And we'll see why of either type. And, right, which we had that already last time, that she had to bring of both types because we don't know which one went first. right? Which sin offering went with it. So assuming if, okay, we'll see in a minute that maybe she brought one down below, then you'll have to match the ola to the sin offering to go for the pair of birds for the birth. And you're going to have to bring one chatat because of these first options. Option one, Aleph, Bet, and Gimel, or A, B, and C, there's no sin offering. So now you're going to have to bring a possible sin offering. Okay, now option two is he did them all below. Now, if he did them all below, there's no burnt offering. Okay, or maybe he did like the other cases, two above and two below, and here you just get all the different options. If it was two pigeons, two birds, if it was four pigeons, four doves, or two and two. Okay, but now here we get to our sin offering. So we're basically in the six that she already had to bring. And now we have to add a sin offering because maybe a sin offering wasn't done at the top or the bottom. Now, according to this opinion, it's enough to just bring one or the other, and that works. But Ben Azai says you need 8, and we're at the end, okay? So if this is making you crazy, don't worry, we're done, okay? We're almost done. Ben Azai says you need 2 sin offerings, so you're going to need 8 altogether. Why? Because he said, okay, and Rashi explains it, and I brought Rashi here on the presentation. Ben Azai l'ta'ameh, he goes according to his own approach. Da'amar hakol holech achar harishon. He says whatever the Kohen did first is what determines. So if, okay, let's go back for a minute. If any of the scenarios where the Kohen did an ola at the top, then the chatat has to match the first bird that he brought. Okay? So if he brought, right, none on top, so there was no ola at all. Okay? But if he brought them all on top, or, right, or some on the top, okay, whatever it might be, there's an ola there. Now, we don't know what he brought first. Since we don't know what he brought first, we have to match the sin offering to the burnt offering. So because whatever the first one he does above, and we have no idea what that was, could have been a dove, it could have been a pigeon, so you have to bring 2 sin offerings. So basically, you have to bring 3 of each, and then another, right, as olas, and 2 sin offerings. Okay, that's the end of our presentation. Okay, take a deep breath. Now, why did we bring all this? Who remembers? Well, we brought it all for this next line. After Ben Azai said 2 sin offerings, Amar Rabbi Yeshua, Zeu Shambuhu, Kishu Chai Kolo Achad, Kishu Mek Kolo Shiva. And this is what they say, quip people say, that the ram, when it's alive, it makes 1 sound. But when it's dead, it makes 8. It makes 7. Why? Because, okay, Rashi explains that when you take a ram and right, when it's alive, obviously it makes 1 sound. When it dies, it can be used, all the different parts of the body can be used as musical instruments. Okay, if anyone wants to know about ancient musical instruments, you can read up on it in Flashback this week of Shuli Mishkin. And basically, what he wants to say is this woman originally had to bring 4, and she could come to a scenario where if she messes up so badly and the coin messes up, she could have to bring 8, right? And 8, really, it's 12 because she brought the original 4 and now she has to bring another 8, right? So you get to this kind of saying this is an absurd scenario, but you got to watch what you do, right? I guess just like the ram, if it gets killed, all of a sudden you can have a lot more possibilities. So here also she's going to have to deal with a lot more possibilities if she did that. Why is this an issue? Because if Rabbi Yeshua is commenting on the Mishnah, the assumption is he agrees with the Mishnah. And then we're back to square one, which is that previous case of the Chatan Ola Stumo Mefureshet that we learned yesterday. Why isn't the Mefureshet case? Can't we just say the one done at the bottom can count as a sin offering? Because either which way, it can become a sin offering. Okay, well, now here comes the obvious problem. I don't know why the Gemara didn't think of this at first. What does Rabbi Yeshua say? Rabbi Yeshua says, if you bring an ola at the bottom, like a chatat, all that, what's the story? There's no me'ila anymore. It's like a chatat, but it doesn't have me'ila. And Rav Abba said, we basically took this ola and turned it into a chatat. But now the Gemara says, Imar da Amar Rabbi Yeshua, la'afuke midei me'ila. He was just saying we can turn it into a chatat for the sake of for the fact that we're going to say the me'ila is removed. Okay, this item is going to have sanctity like a chata, which means a chata usually can be eaten. Now, again, I told you there's this debate whether you can eat it or not, okay? But let's assume either you can or you can't. That's not the point. The point is, even if you can't eat it, which is what most people think, it's still going to be like a chata that there's no obligation of misuse of consecrated property. But lemesak lechova mi'amar. Whoever said someone the owner could fulfill an obligation for a korban chatat with this? Nobody said that. And the entire topic of kinim is did she fulfill her obligation or not? It wasn't talking about is there me'ila, is there not me'ila? Can the meat be eaten by the Kohen even if you go that far? They were talking about did she fulfill her obligation? Of course, she doesn't fulfill her obligation that way. Rabbi Yoshua never said that. Even though Rav Barava said you're basically turning it into, it morphs into a chatat. It's not a complete chatat. This is for the purposes of there's no me'ila, but not that it actually becomes a chatat and the owner could be yotze their obligation. And in fact, if you think about it, it was an ola that you did l'shem chatat. What did we learn in the first Mishnah? You do an ola l'shem chatat. It's a good sacrifice, but it doesn't fulfill the person's obligation, right? So theoretically or practically, we actually didn't need to go through any of those Mishnayot and Kinim because they were totally irrelevant to our topic, but we learned something new and it'll help us when we get to Kinim. Okay, new Mishnah. As part of the daf is going to be much simpler. Kol apsulim shemalku melikatam psula. Okay, this is a very hard line to translate right now, but because you're going to see there's two different interpretations of it. Any psulim, okay, now whether this means people who are disqualified for doing malika, like a non-Kohen, okay, or an animal or a way of doing it that's disqualified. Okay, we'll talk about this. It's a very unclear line. Even some people have it, not even at this point in the Mishnah. Anyway, won't get into all the Girsa issues, but all the psulim shemalku that did malika, malikatam psula. So if it's a disqualified malika, so the malika is disqualified. Okay, that's not right, really telling us much that we didn't know. But eno mitame beit habliya. But it doesn't cause impurity of the beit habliya. What is that? That's what we call a nevela. Okay, let's talk basic laws. So nevela is a dead animal. Okay, a carcass of a dead animal or a dead bird. And for animals, there's tuma by touching it. For birds, there's a weird kind of tuma if it's a kosher bird. While it's in, okay, by touching it and carrying it like regular nevela, it doesn't have that kind of tuma. But if it's in your mouth, while it's in your mouth, you're impure. Clothes you touch, clothes you're wearing, all become impure. Okay, things you touch become impure while it's in your mouth. So that's called tuma beit habliya. Now, normally, what removes tuma beit habliya? If you take a bird and you slaughter it. Or if you're in the temple, you do malika. Now, this is very important to understand. I assume you understand it already, but in case you don't, I'm going to go over it. Malika is the slaughtering of birds in the temple. In the temple, only malika works. Shechita doesn't work. Okay, you don't shecht birds in the temple. Outside the temple, malika doesn't work. Only shechita works. Okay, so each has its own special area where it works. Okay, a shiur more in depth about malika actually is in Hebrew on our site of Mirav Tubakana that went up yesterday. But basically, these things, okay, now they remove shechita outside the temple removes the there's no tuma then, right? And malika inside the temple makes sure these things ensure that it doesn't become an avela. What if you swap it around, okay, and you do shechita outside or inside, or you do malika outside? We're going to talk about all those cases. Or what if you did a malika? That's not a good malika. So that's the whole question of this Mishnah. Does it remove the tumat nevela or no? It's a nevela because you didn't do the malika right. Okay, so that's the issue. So we're going to differentiate in this Mishnah between certain cases. Now, the differentiation in this Mishnah, Rashi already tells us. So the first case is, which we don't even know what it is, but psulim that did malika sounds like it's people, like non-kohanim. The malika is no good, but eino mitame beit habliya. But it does remove the impurity of nevela. And Rashi explains why. Because milikatan mitaharatan. There's going to be a direct correlation between this and something else. And that's Rashi explains why. Because their malika actually does do something. Okay, what does it do? Lefisha nifsal b'kodesh. Well, this is going to be, we're going to see this in the Mishnah later. The Mishnah is going to say, this is the category. If it got disqualified in the temple area, okay, like let's say a non-Kohen took it, it was fine. And then a non-Kohen did the malika. So before that, it was fine. became disqualified in the temple by when the Malika happened. Va'ahane Malikatan she'imalulo yerdu. Well, that kind of psul in a different area of laws is what if I did Malika and I wasn't allowed to, or let's say I did a Malika in the improper manner. If I put it on the altar, I wouldn't have to take it off. I'm not allowed to put it on the altar. I'm not allowed to burn it or do what I'm supposed to do with it. But if I did, the altar accepts it. The altar can handle that. There's certain things that if I put them on the altar, they're so disqualified that I have to take them right away off. So the ones that are not that disqualified, that if actually the Malika allowed us to leave it on the altar if it got there by accident, that means that the Malika did something. So the Malika must also remove it from its impurity. Whereas if it has to go off the altar, if somebody put it on there, then that's so disqualified. The Malika did nothing. So if the Malika did nothing, well, then it didn't help from Nevela. There's an intercorrelation between those two things. We'll see later the Gemara connects them also. So right now, the first line, we're not really sure. Is it just a topic sentence? Or is it talking about people? Or is it talking about what's upcoming? So malak b'smol o b'layla, if you did it with your left hand, which Kohen's not allowed to do malika with the left hand, or at night, which they're not allowed to do malika at night. Remember, all the avodot in the temple are done during the day. Or, this is a totally different category, shachat chulin b'fnim v'kodshim b'chutz. If you did the action of slaughtering, but you did it in the wrong way. This is what I told you before. So you slaughtered chulin inside. In other words, you did it in a place where you're supposed to do malika, but you actually did it with something that doesn't require malika because it wasn't a sacrifice. Or you did kodshim b'chutz, or you took something that was supposed to do malika inside, but you did it outside and you slaughtered it. Since slaughtering always removes from malika, this works to remove the to remove from nevela, even though you did these in the wrong place and you shouldn't have slaughtered the chulin inside and you shouldn't have slaughtered the kodshim outside. But since it was a shchita always removes nevela. So that works. So all those einam matamot be'ed. That's the category of items that doesn't create impurity at all. There's no nevela. But malak b'sakin, if you did malika with a knife, which you're not allowed to, remember the Kohen has to do it with his finger, or malak chulin b'fnim, or you did malika you did malika inside on non-sacrificial items, or kodshim b'chutz, or you did sacrificial items outside. You did the malika, so it's you. The kodshim are not supposed to be outside, and you're not supposed to do malika outside. Or tolin shelo igius manam b'nei yonah she'ovar manam. B'nei yonah are young. That's why they're called b'nei yonah. So the b'nei yonah, if they're too old, they pass the age that you're allowed, or the tolim, which are supposed to be older and didn't yet get to the age they're supposed to be, or she'apshaga pav shenismeit enav shenikta'a ragla. Okay, its wing dried up, or blinded eye, or its leg got cut off. No, there's no blemishes in birds at all. But these are three things that are so disqualified because the bird's really in bad shape. It's not really called a blemish, but it's missing a limb. So that disqualifies a bird for sacrifice. Those are, let's just call them at this point, so disqualified. Okay, we don't, the category, we'll see it in a minute, that they're mitame beit habliya. All those malikas don't work to remove the nevela, and it will be impure. Zeh klal. Here comes the Mishnah with a klal. Now later the Gemara is going to say, why does I have to tell you zeh klal? We always like having the rule, right? Because we don't learn so much in general. And when we write rule books, we write rules. We don't write cases, right? But the Mishnah is always organized by cases, and they're always surprised when they bring a rule. It must be coming to add something new. Kol shepsulo b'kodesh. If it got disqualified inside, then it's not a problem. If it was fine and then got disqualified inside because something went wrong, like they used their left hand and something like that, it's not mitame beit habliya. But lo psulo b'kodesh, if it wasn't disqualified inside, then mitame beit habliya. Okay, then it is. Now, a bit of a problem with this general rule. It doesn't. Right, the knife was actually inside, so some of these are exceptions to this rule exactly. But that's a general rule, or a general rule, even if it's not the only general rule. So now comes the Gemara, and we're going to eventually see a machloka between Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, specifically on what I was kind of wavering about in the Mishnah, about the zar. Kind of was wishy-washy about it, and that's because they have a machloket about a non-kohen. So it never says zar in this Mishnah. So comes Rav and says, small v'layla emitam beit habliya. Okay, that's explicit from the Mishnah. He's just reviewing, but probably to foil it with this next case. So if you do it with your left hand, you do it at night, it's not a problem. There's no, right? It's not a nevela. Doesn't have that impurity. Zal, non-Kohen, visakin, and a knife, mitam and beit habliya. So notice he puts zar, he doesn't understand that line, obviously. Kol apsulim shemakum likatam psula is all people. Okay? He's talking about, we don't know how he reads that line, what it's referring to. We're going to have to get back to that. But they are mitame beit habliya. He puts the zar in the second category. A non-Kohen does malika. That's so disqualified that it actually has the status of impurity now, this bird, as a dead carcass. Maishna small. So now they want to try to understand Rav. Before we get to Rabbi Yochanan, who disagrees, we want to understand Rav. What's the difference between small? Well, we're now going to say what makes it that small. We're going to say it doesn't carry impurity of an avela. If you did malika with your left hand, it actually removes it from being an avela. And nighttime. And why is that not the same for the zar? So let's see why. Mashna smol de'ilay hechsherabi Yom Kippurim. Now there are sometimes, like the Kohen Gadol and Yom Kippur has to use his left hand for avoda because he has to bring in, remember, the coals and the pan with the ketoret, and he can't do them both in his right hand, so he has to hold one in his left, one in his right. Right? He puts the ketoret in his left hand. Belayla. Now, night, you can't do any avodot, but you can actually burn the parts on the altar, leave them burning at night. So you have a case where small is allowed, and you have a case, now it's not obviously in Malika, but it is situations where we allow something to be done at night, we allow something to be done with the left hand. Well, zar nami, where does the zar come in? What avoda can the zar do? Shchita, right? B'shchita, remember? Women can do shchita, non-Kohanim can do shchita. Okay, shchita in the mikdash is allowed. So there you have it. Why is zar different from the others? Zar also has a heter, so we should say zar is not so severe like the other ones. It should remove nevela. To which they answer very simply, shchita lav avodahi. Shchita is not an avoda. Now, why can they get away with saying shchita is not avoda? First of all, if you have your bookmarks, it says it. There's 4 avodot in the korbanot. Shchita is the first. How can you say it's not an avoda? What they mean is it's not an avoda the Kohanim do. Okay, and what's defined as an avoda? Something that can only be done by the Kohen. So while it is considered one of the 4 main avodot, and there's pigul, right? In shchita, you can be a mefagel by thinking something during shchita, but it's not really technically an avoda because it's not, it can be done by a zar. So that proves that it's not really a ritual because all the rituals in the temple have to be done by Kohanim. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, shchita is not an avoda that requires kahuna, velo, if ahama Rabbi Zera, remember, I'm just going to remind you, malika requires Kohen only. Malika is the parallel to shchita by birds. But what we're saying is don't say malika by zar is going to be permitted. In other words, it's going to remove nevela, and if it went on the altar, we won't have to take it down because it's parallel by shchita, right? Hazar, because they say shchita is not considered an avoda. Malika is because it's done by a kohen, but shchita is not, so you can't compare the two. To which they say, what do you mean? Shchita para, we're talking about the para aduma, the red heifer. The shchita of the red heifer, bizarre psula. Rabbi Zera said, a zar can't do it. How do we know? Machave Rav Allah, Rav pointed it out. Elazar v'chuka. It says it has to be done by Elazar, who was a Kohen. And it says chuka, which means this is the way it has to be. So there you see that the shchita paraduma has to happen by a Kohen, which must mean it's an avoda. To which the Gemara answers, shani parad, the koche beta kabayiti. I mean, paraduma is not koche mizbech. It doesn't go on the altar. It's a different category of koche beta kabayit. So the Gemara says, oh, so what? If you're going to say, now, Beta Kabayit is always less severe than Mizbech. So if you're going to say that Shechita is an avoda when it comes to Paraduma, you're going to say, is it not a Kol Sheken? If you're going to say it's avoda for the Paraduma, which isn't even things that are going to go on the altar, of course it's an avoda for something that's about to go on the altar, right? Koche Beta Kabayit Baukuna, Koche Mizbech Mibaya. Koche Beta Kabayit Nikuna, what you're going to even say Koche Mizbech don't, or isn't really an avoda? Like, they're not suggesting really that shchita in the temple needs a Kohen because we know it doesn't. But it should just mean, though, that at least it's considered an avoda. If it's considered an avoda by the paraduma, all the more so. To which the Gemara says, no, that's not true. Amar of Shisha Bered Rav Idi Midi Dehava Amarot Negaim to Lava Vodhi Ubayakuna. Who determines when something has a leprous mark on it or a person's a leper? A Kohen. Kohen looks at the nega and decides, is this leprosy or not? Has to be done by a Kohen. But would you call that a sacrificial rite? No, of course not. Paraduma also is not in the realm of sacrifices. It's a whole different thing. It's Bedek Habayit again. Bedek Habayit means upkeep of the temple, but it just means any category that's something sanctified in the temple that's not going on the altar, which Paraduma falls into, is that category. The fact that it needs a Kohen and the slaughtering of it needs a Kohen doesn't teach you anything about slaughtering of sacrifices because that needs a Kohen for some completely different reason, just like looking at a leprous mark. So we're back to saying we can understand that the Zar, according to Rav, doesn't remove nevela because it's not like you could say, oh well, by Malika, right, which is an avoda, there is some sort of heter because by shchita a Zar can do it, but shchita is not an avoda and it's completely different, right? So we don't have a proof from Paraduma or from when we tried to say that shchita is not an avoda. Okay, so that didn't work. So now we're okay. Now they say v'nelaf mi bama, but they're still bothered by Rav. Say, why don't we learn from the bamot? Okay, what's with the bamot? Well, when there was no temple, you were allowed any zar could do malika. So what do you see? It's not there's a heter. There was a heter bisman bamot. They say mi bama lo yalif. We're not going to learn. There was a heter at some point in history. That's not relevant. That was a different time, a different circumstances. They say, what do you mean we don't learn from Bama v'lo v'hatanya? Didn't we learn a Braita? We saw this sugya already. Minayin liyotze she'im ala lo yired. How do you know? Again, they're comparing here. Here you see the Gemara is doing it. They're comparing this issue of if it went on the altar, it doesn't go off, and that's compared to our issue of does it remove nevela? But if something left the azara, how do we know that if it went, then it was brought back in, so it was disqualified. But if it went on the altar, we don't take it off. How do we know that? Sharei yotze kasher b'bama. Because Yotze was allowed in the Bama because the Bamot had no designated area. So anything was considered Yotze because it was outside of the, once it was not on the altar. So if it worked in the Bama, so therefore it works. We leave it on the altar. So you do see they use that as a criteria. So the Gemara says, wait, didn't you remember the rest of the sugya? In the end, they say you can't learn it from Bama. And Tana azot Torah olah samachle. The Tana there actually relied on a different pasuk, Zot Torah olah, which meant all these things can go up. In other words, all sorts of things that went up can stay up. Okay, and in the end, it wasn't learned from Bama at all. So we can't learn from Bama, so that's another reason not to reject Rav. Now we get to Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Zal ein metame beit habliya. Okay, he puts Zar in the first category, understanding the Mishnah the way we sort of read it in the beginning, the kol psulim, right? The do malika, meaning all the people who do malika, meaning who aren't supposed to do malika. And sakin mitamei beit habliya. Okay, it just compares the zar to the knife. If it's done with a knife, though, it is mitamei beit habliya. So now the Gemara is going to bring our Mishnah and say our Mishnah makes no sense according to Rav. Tanan kol psulim shemakum malikatam psula. Bishlos, how do you explain that line? Bishlam ala Rabbi Yochanan. What's kol? Right? It's obviously coming to include some other case that wasn't mentioned in the Mishnah. What's it coming to include? Obviously, la tuye zar. It must be coming to include a non-Kohen. That works perfectly according to Rabbi Yochanan. Ela l'Rav, kol la tuye mai. What's kol coming to include that wasn't mentioned in our Mishnah already? To which he answers a strange answer, la tuye smo v'layla. It's to say that if you do it with your left hand or you do it at night, it's not going to be a nevela. So the Gemara says, that makes no sense. The first line says kol, which includes small and laila. And the next line says small and laila are not mitame beit habliya. That would be completely repetitive. Small v'laila behedya katani. They're said explicitly. You don't need an all psulim includes what is in the next line. To which they answer, no, tane v'hadran mefarishla. They say this topic sentence, and then they define what did we mean by kol. What we meant is small v'laila. And that's how Rav will have to read our Mishnah. So we now have two readings of that first line of the Mishnah, which again I mentioned, some people don't even think it's the first line of the Mishnah, but according to this, it seems clear the Gemara thought it was the first line of the Mishnah because it says it and then it explains it. Okay, now they're going to start, I'll just kind of read the very beginning here, but they're now going to raise another difficulty on Rav from this next line in the Mishnah, the last line, or second to last. Zehaklal, this is the rule. Kol shaya psulo b'kodesh, eno mitamei b'gadin b'beit habliya. Bishlam ala Rabbi Yochanan kol la tuye zar, but ela l'Rav, Latu yemai. What's the call they're coming to include, right? Because again, what did I tell you when we learned that line? Gemara is always going to say this must come to include something additional besides just giving a rule. What must be including? So according to Rabbi Yochanan, you could say it's coming to include the zar. Let's say you don't understand the beginning like Rabbi Yochanan, so then you say this line at least is including the zar. But for Rav, what's it coming to include? And we'll get back to that in tomorrow's class. So what we did today, structurally at least, it's kind of simple. Rabbi Yoshua, even if the content might have been more complicated, Rabbi Yoshua basically says that um, the the ola that was done below, like the chatat, l'shem chatat, all that can basically, according to Ravad Rava, the way he pushed Rabbi Yochanan father to say, he really thinks it morphs into a chatat, okay, although even though not exactly completely. How does that correspond to all these mishnayot in in Kinim, which seem to not think that that works? And we did see in the end, you might say maybe they're just not Rabbi Yeshua, but they are. Okay. And again, Rabbi Yeshua's main issue was there's no me'ila in them. And maybe the Kohen can eat them. But that was what the Gemara answered. But he never said you could fulfill your obligation. And the topic in Kinim in all those cases was does the woman fulfill her obligation with this sin offering, this burnt offering potentially that might have been done at the bottom, and why can't we count it as a sin offering? And the answer is because even Rabbi Yeshua didn't think that you could count it as a sin offering and that someone could fulfill their obligation with that. That's never what he intended to say, and therefore there's no question. And then we get to this split in the Mishnah, the next Mishnah, between which kind of disqualified malikas remove it from this tuma impurity of nevela, of tuma beta blia, and which don't remove it. And again, it's parallel to which things go on the altar can stay on the altar, and which things that are put on the altar are so disqualified that they have to go off the altar. And the determining factor for both of those things is was the disqualification in the Kodesh, in the temple, did it get disqualified? That's actually better. Or was it disqualified even before, or so disqualified that it wasn't something in the temple that caused disqualification in particular? And with that, and then we basically went through Rav and Rabbi Yochanan who have a disagreement about a zar. What if a zar does it? It wasn't mentioned explicitly in the Mishnah. It did seem to be maybe mentioned implicitly, but Rav would have to say, no, 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 it wasn't, and somehow explain those lines some other way. With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone Shabbat Shalom and a Chodesh Tov.